everyone. My name is Kareem Tapsh, and I am the co-founder and co-director of O Cinema, and I'm really delighted to be with you here again. We're just so wonderfully glad to be continuing this long partnership with our friends at Oolite Arts and Art Films, which brings films by, for, and about artists to our community. Just over a year ago, when the world closed down for the pandemic, we were very quickly able to transition our art films screenings online, and it's been a great success. I would be remiss if I didn't say that O Cinema in South Beach has reopened. We hope to see you there. Please join us. You can find our whole slate of current films at www.o-cinema.org. And if you don't subscribe to our email list, please do. And know that we are still observing social distancing and mask requirements at the theater, and it is a safe and fun way to enjoy the magic of the movies the way they're meant to be on the big screen. Tonight's film is one I'm really excited about. Wojnarowicz, Fuck You, Faggot Fucker. It's a hell of a title for a hell of an artist. David Wojnarowicz was a groundbreaking artist who used his art as a tool for, I'd say, enlightenment, really, to bring attention to the plight of queer people, and particularly queer people who were dying of AIDS like he was, in a time in the 1980s in New York City when no one seemed to be paying attention. His work was provocative, it was thrilling, it was in your face, and it was very important, and it remains important. So it's such a joy to see a film that takes into account his significance in the canon of not just queer art and queer artists, but in contemporary and modern art movements of the United States. For myself as a queer person, I'm glad to see that we are celebrating and recognizing the work of these pioneering artists like Wojnarowicz. And I'm super excited to be introducing our filmmaker and our cinematic arts manager, Danielle Bender, and filmmaker Chris McKim, who's had a hell of a year. This is the second film he releases. You could also see his other film on Peacock streaming now. So please welcome Danielle Bender and Chris McKim.
Thank you, Kareem. Welcome to tonight's post-film Q&A. My name is Danielle Bender, as Kareem mentioned, and I'm the Cinematic Arts Manager at Oolite Arts. We're going to be taking your questions at the end of the conversation, so please make sure to drop them into the Q&A feature. I'm going to try and get to as many as possible before the end of the night. But tonight, I am lucky enough to be joined by the director of this film, Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker and TV producer, Chris McKim. So welcome, Chris.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Chris.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
How's it going?
Good.
You look radiant with that ring light.
Is it too much?
No, it's perfect.
Okay.
I love it. It looks great.
Yeah.
You're over on the West Coast, so that's why it's bright over there, and it's a little dark over here, so it looks great. I'm gonna hop right into it. This film was so incredible. I know our audience shares my enthusiasm for it. What made you want to make this documentary?
The idea sort of came up in July of 2017. And by that point, we were 6 months into the Trump administration. I had already had my breakdown from the election, and I was really trying to find something that I thought would make myself feel better, or at least productive. I realized that was about a year before there was going to be a retrospective of David's work. I sort of did a quick deep dive and realized there was so much to his story that was interesting, on top of everything he had to say, both in his writing and his art, that really seemed to speak to today. And so that's really where it all started.
And did you learn about David in that moment, or did you have previous knowledge of David as an artist?
No, I was aware of David and his work, and I had seen the Rimbaud's, and the Broad here in LA has one of his paintings, and I was had read Close to the Knives, but I think at that time I was sort of running through names and going down one of my little wiki wormholes. And that's when I realized at that point, his story hadn't been told. And so that, on top of, seeing that there was this retrospective and everything that was going on here in the world really sort of like inspired that in the moment. And that's when I reached out to PPOW and Elise Beanel, who works there. They managed the estate and sort of they had me, meet with Tom and, got their blessing and I then went to World of Wonder and Randy and Fenton. And that's sort of like, once all those folks were on board, is really when, I think that the project started officially, but it didn't take very long to get people interested.
Yeah, of course. And, this film features so much archival footage, copious amounts of notes, recordings, diary entries, photos. Can you talk a little bit about your process and how you were able to use everything that David left behind that these folks have been archiving and holding on to?
Yeah. Well, I was very lucky that David's archive is at Fales Library at NYU.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything as you can see in the film, he kind of kept everything. And once the estate was on board, I sort of, had access to all of that material. And, I will say that David's collection, the library had put a lot of work into putting a lot of the information online. So even before I got there, I could sort of like start looking at his journals and get a sense of what was in the library. And it wasn't, I think, until they started sending me the audio files for the cassette tapes that, I really got a sense of just how incredible the archive was going to be. And I knew that there's a great biography about him by Cindy Carr. And, I knew there was material there, but I didn't realize that David was going to be able to tell so much of his story on his own. I sort of imagined having to take a lot more of his written material, whether it's from his essays and the books or the journals, and sort of have those read and performed in some way. But once there was so much great audio, and through all that, like David really shared a journey in addition to, lots of nights out and frustrations and whatever it might be. Just listening to his story, I loaded up my iPhone and I would walk around listening to these files, and each one was represented like one half of an audio cassette. So like 30 to 45 minutes. And I just put them on shuffle. So one moment I might be, in 1981, listening to him, which is that period when he met Peter Hujar and, he goes to the bar and has that conversation with him, which was really pivotal in terms of, giving him kind of that self-confidence and a boost when he needed it. But, going through those, the audio tapes, hearing his journey, hearing the elements that he used himself in other pieces, such as the Paris tape that he records from his sisters, that on that tape, there's all this like European radio, these news reports and all these like sort of their version of NPR, because it's, just people like reading from a book. And he ended up using that for the Three Teens Kill song, Stay and Fight. So just sort of like understanding how David would mix and match stuff, I think came to really kind of help guide the style of the film. I mean, It is sort of chronological, but in terms of how those elements would work together. And then the answering machine tapes, my gosh. There were dozens of those, and they were, it was both tedious, but like just completely fascinating too, because, just listening to, you really kind of learn a lot from somebody by listening to their messages.
Yeah, and you're getting a sense of the company one keeps, and the people that loved him the most, and his day-to-day, which is, I just am curious about what people would think about my day-to-day if they listened to my voicemails. But I mean, David was an orator, and I think at one point in the film, one of his bandmates called their work "Film for Your Ears," and you see that your process, you tie a lot of audio into it while constructing the film. How do you go through that process? It feels so collaborative.
Well, we really did sort of start from the audio up, because it was, with David's voice and keeping all the interviews off camera. Jesse Halberg is the person who had that quote. And he also sort of described their sounds as a cacophonic barrage, which was kind of the process of going through David's tapes, and sort of going, like, suddenly hitting sound effects or whatever it might be. And then the journals. And then that really kind of determined or inspired us in terms of the sound design. And from there, we just started, layering on over the images. So I would sort of cut little sections of audio, whatever. Watching the film, you can probably guess, like the Mnuchin story or something. I would cut the audio, I would throw some images on, I would, pass that on to Dave Stanky, the editor, and then he would work his magic as I was like, trying to put together some other section for him and kind of getting ready. So that was, it probably looks crazier than it felt at the time, because once we had the story built out, it was just about trying to visualize it and trying to kind of, we were lucky because on top, I always talk about the audio from the archive, but, David also had 500 contact sheets. So that was over 10,000 images and all of his Super 8 film. And again, looking at how he used images in his work, in the films and the installations and everything, and kind of appropriating these elements, because he might use one image in, several different pieces, and the same with the text. Essays would, quotes that are in the Peter Hujar painting are in, Close to the Knives, and he would speak them in other locations. So that really kind of gave us license to appropriate his kind of iconography, but it also really felt collaborative with David, especially because of the tapes, because, sometimes we'd get ourselves into some editorial corner, and then we would just like listen to a little more of David's tape or start some other random tape, and there would be an answer there. There would be like a conclusion, or like, oh, this is the beginning of the story, or whatever it might be. So, and, not wanting it to come haunt me, it was also a big guiding factor in how we do this. But I think hopefully he's okay.
No, it felt very cohesive and felt very in line with his work and, his vision and the way that he presented himself. I mean, on that end, do you think that making this film, did it change your process as a documentary filmmaker?
I wouldn't, I don't know that it has not changed my process. I mean, the process for Wojnarowicz is the same editorial process and the same production process for RuPaul's Drag Race. Like the process for all these, like that is very much the same. What the elements are, what you have to play with in editing. Certainly, whether or not you have to shoot is a big factor. But the actual process in trying to tell stories and find the moments that resonate and whatever they may be, like that's all very similar. I did like not filming anything. I will say that if I never have to film another thing again, it would be too soon. But no, I will.
But except at the end, at the very end.
Yeah. Well, we did film some interviews initially, and then as David's audio, I started listening to that. It was clear like we should just keep everyone off camera so that David could be as alive as anyone else that you're listening. I mean, you really have no idea who is and isn't, as you're listening.
Yeah. And, going to David's work, he was really unapologetic about his politics, his queerness. Can you talk a little bit about how they both factored into his work?
Well, certainly. Well, even, the film's namesake, Fuck You, Faggot, Fucker, of course, is, David found this sort of like graffiti, this homophobic graffiti and this slur, and, someone had scribbled something else on, I think it was, anyway, I'll get it confused, but someone had scribbled something else on it. And, David's, idea is to take that, incorporate it into a painting. And, if in the film you see his little notes, and it's like, paint beautiful boys, or paint beautiful picture of boys kissing, and like incorporate these things and put himself in the, in the painting as well. And, it was really about putting himself into the work and then using that to mean something. And, he's very clearly identified with the AIDS crisis and the response to that. but he was political the whole time, through the late 70s, and as they were working on those songs for 3 Teens Kill 4, and it's just the focus changed. And I think, the longer Reagan was in power, the more specific targets there were. And so I think that kind of helped focus his rage. But the fact that he was willing to kind of like mine his own pain, whether it was from his childhood or whatever it might be, and put that into the work and really kind of expose himself, I think was both in some ways therapeutic, but it also makes the work resonate more, I think.
Yeah, and there was one part in the film where Peter Hujar was discouraging David from throwing out works that maybe were too aggressive or too offensive, and told him not to compromise himself over others' discomfort. So it's interesting to see how he's navigating through his own emotions and figuring out what works for his practice and informed by the people around him. One thing that I'm curious about for your opinion on is what do you think David's work means to a more contemporary queer community? Would it change, or does it resonate the same?
Would it? I'm not sure I understand that. would it change?
Like, when you're watching, when I'm watching the film, so many things feel like I'm in current day. The politics are feeling the same. The issues are slightly different, but we're seeing the same problems occur over and over. Does David's message still resonate with a contemporary crowd? Is it something that we've changed the way we view how artists respond to politics and art?
Well, I mean, no, I think the fact that those elements in the film and the things that he, as you said, the situations are different, but his reactions to them are very relatable. And I think the power structures of the problems that he's pointing out, and when he talks about the one tribe nation and pre-event in existence, I mean, all of those things do resonate today because they're still the same problem. It's like he wasn't necessarily talking about white supremacy, but he was talking about white supremacy. And all of that stuff. So I think that, I think that the work does sort of continue to resonate, and certainly with the writing as well. The work is so eclectic that there are so many different ways to get into that sort of David world, whether it's through Close to the Knives or his journals or, whatever it might be, to get a sense of, what he was thinking in addition to the images and the art.
Yeah, on that note, one scene that resonated with me is when David gets a call from Susan Wyatt when the NEA was trying to pull funds for his show. And in the clip, he's really, at the end of it, he's emotional and in tears because Susan has just called him back and said she'll make a statement about failure from the government to confront homophobia. This is a big question, but how do you think the art world can get more authentically and explicitly political, or just make statements that are more authentic?
Well, I mean, I think artists need to be true to themselves and their messages, and then the institutions that are sort of built on getting artists out there, whether they're galleries or museums or festivals or whatever, manners maybe, they need to be open to these artists. I mean, it's the same problem in film and television and print. It's about bringing in other members of the tribe and bringing in different voices and points of view. I think for the individuals, people just have to be true to themselves and create things that speak to the issues that they see and they want to address, through their work.
Yeah, and what do you think we see from this film what David's impact was at the time, but do you still think that there's lasting effects or things that we might see today that are attributed to David's activism?
Well, certainly, the coat, the jacket he wore at the FDA, throw my body. You know, that's been, you know, repeated endlessly through the years. I've seen it for, you know, during the gun marches, through various healthcare, you know, sort of moments when people are out in the streets and there's protests and stuff. So I certainly think that those elements are there. I think, you know, I think the more people, you know, see his work, elements will sort of come in as well. I think a lot of what he wrote in his essays, especially Close to the Knife, the collection Close to the Knives, you know, I think resonates with people. And I think that it does, you know, anyone who has picked it up, I think has never forgotten it. And I think it does speak to who what they try to do and how they try to speak out.
Yeah. Chris, I'm going to be popping over to the Q&A in a second if our audience has any questions. So just a reminder to our audience, if you want to put any questions, you can put it into the chat or the Q&A. I'll be checking both. But I did have a question for you specifically, not necessarily about David. You know, you previously directed Frida Got a Gun, which is a documentary featuring New Orleans bounce legend Big Frida. You've directed Out of Iraq, a love story involving a translator and a soldier falling in love. And very importantly, you executive produced RuPaul's Drag Race for season 1 through 4, which we thank you for. This film is about David, who's a queer icon. How does queerness figure into your professional practice?
Those were all pretty queer projects. So, and I will add, I co-directed Out of Iraq with David Wojnarowicz. I mean, I think it just, that is, I don't even think, I mean, I think it's just my point of view, and I think it certainly informs the way I see things. You know, I don't know that, you know, as I said, I mean, those are very queer projects, which, you know, have really you know, I think it's been amazing to be able to work with these subjects and to be able to create projects out of them and tell stories that people react to. But they've all also really impacted my life in big ways, and sort of guided my path. And not in a career way, you know, like in a personal growth way.
Yeah.
Which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah. Well, what is upcoming? What's next for you, or is it under wraps right now?
Good question. Let's say under wraps for the moment.
Okay, I won't pry any further. I do have one comment from our audience that I wanted to read to you really quick. That I thought was really beautiful. Lori said, "I'm still digesting this film. I loved it. The city I knew, living in the East Village, his art, speaking of such truths, his passion, talents, genius for synthesizing big ideas and articulating them so fluidly. I have friends who are integral to this scene, and we were all losing friends to AIDS. As I said, I'm still digesting it. I need others I know to view it." That seems like a good cue for me to ask you, where can people watch this film if they weren't able to tune in tonight?
It is streaming at kinonow.com. They have a page set up. And also, if you go to fuckyoufagotfucker.com, it links directly to that, which was a little easier to manage. But yes, kinonow.com. It's now, you know, streaming digitally. It had been in virtual cinemas in the spring, and now is exclusively there.
And are you still on a festival circuit, or you wrap that up after this year?
Yeah, that seems to, you know, I think once it's released, I think that the festivals kind of die. It was originally supposed to come out last April 2020. It was supposed to premiere at Tribeca, and we were racing to finish, to, you know, do the online and mix as the world was shutting down. And so that went away. Frida and Wojnarowicz were supposed to premiere there. And so we were lucky that in November it did premiere at Doc NYC, and then Kino Lorber picked it up. And so now it's, now anyone can watch it anywhere. Well, Canada and US anywhere.
Well, I sure hope that the next film that you have coming out or next project that you're working on, we're not locked up in a pandemic, and that we could fly you in to Miami so that we could see you in person. But thank you so much, Chris, for this lovely conversation and for this beautiful film. As a reminder, everyone, you can view the film on kinonow.com. Or, and I don't feel comfortable saying it because it's not my word. I can't say that, but
well, if you just, this will send you to that page as well. Just fuckyoufagotfucker.com. It's the title.com.
Maybe don't do that when you are on your work VPN. Your boss might not know what you're looking for, but you could totally search that at home.
It's just
what?
I was saying it's just easier to share sometimes.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Chris, so much. I guess we'll sign off for tonight, and looking forward to seeing what you have coming up next.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.